The Supreme Court just delivered a major 6-3 emergency ruling last night, and the entire country is reacting to it. This decision is already causing serious tension between state governments and federal authorities, and legal analysts from all political backgrounds are saying this could be one of the most important emergency rulings we've seen in years. The implications of this case go far beyond just the parties involved. It has the potential to completely reshape how power is divided between state governments and Washington, and it's going to affect major policy areas for years to come. Before we get into the details, I need you to do something really quick. Smash that like button right now if you care about protecting your Second Amendment rights. It only takes a second, and it makes a huge difference in getting this information out to more people who need it. Also, if you're not already subscribed to the channel, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any future updates on your rights. Trust me, you're going to want to stay informed about this stuff. What makes this ruling so critical is that it directly challenges how the federal government has been using the court system to override state laws. The Supreme Court's decision is essentially telling federal courts that they've been going too far with their power, and that needs to stop. This isn't just some minor technical adjustment. This is a fundamental statement about how our constitutional system is supposed to work and who has the authority to make decisions that affect millions of Americans. The case involves a situation where multiple states were being blocked from enforcing their own laws because federal judges issued what are called nationwide injunctions. These are court orders that don't just affect the people who brought the lawsuit, but instead block an entire state law from being enforced anywhere in the country. The Supreme Court looked at this practice and said that lower courts have been overstepping their authority by issuing these sweeping orders. Here's what actually happened. Several weeks ago, a group of states filed legal challenges claiming that federal agencies were going around both Congress and the courts to essentially rewrite state laws without any legislative approval. These states argued that federal agencies were using emergency powers to bypass the normal democratic process. Lower federal courts responded by issuing nationwide injunctions that completely blocked these state laws from taking effect at all. But the Supreme Court just stepped in and said that's not how the system is supposed to work. In their 6-3 decision, the justices made it clear that lower courts don't have the authority to issue these broad nationwide blocks when only a few specific plaintiffs are involved in the case. The court is basically saying that if only a handful of people are actually harmed by a state law, a federal judge can't just shut down that entire law for everyone in the country. The relief should be limited to helping those specific people who brought the lawsuit, not creating policy for the whole nation. This decision builds on something the Supreme Court said earlier this year in a case called Labrador v. Poe, which also placed restrictions on how far lower courts can go with their injunctions. But this new emergency ruling takes those principles even further and applies them in real time to an active dispute. The court is sending a very clear message to lower federal courts that the days of issuing nationwide injunctions to block state laws might be coming to an end. The reaction to this ruling has been swift and intense. State officials are celebrating it as a huge win for federalism and for the principle that states should be able to govern themselves without constant interference from Washington. On the other side, people inside the Department of Justice are privately calling this decision a legal earthquake. And they're right to be concerned, because this ruling could impact dozens of cases that are currently working their way through the courts right now. Think about all the contentious policy areas where the federal government and states disagree. Immigration enforcement, gun regulations, election rules, environmental policies. All of these areas involve ongoing legal battles where federal courts have been issuing nationwide injunctions. This Supreme Court decision could change the outcome of all those cases. Let me give you a concrete example of how this works in practice. Let's say a state passes a controversial new law about border security or firearms. Under the old system, a single federal judge could freeze that law across the entire state, preventing it from being enforced anywhere. But under the Supreme Court's new interpretation, that same federal judge can only provide relief to the specific people who filed the lawsuit. The state law would still be enforceable against everyone else. That's a massive change in how the system operates, and it gives states much more room to implement and enforce their own laws even when those laws are being challenged in court. The fact that the Supreme Court issued this as an emergency ruling is also significant. They didn't wait for full briefings and oral arguments and a lengthy deliberation process. They acted quickly because they viewed this issue as urgent and important enough to require immediate intervention. That tells you how seriously the justices take this problem of lower courts overstepping their authority. Justice Gorsuch wrote a separate opinion that really drives home the point the court is making. He emphasized that court injunctions should only go as far as necessary to protect the specific plaintiffs who brought the case. They shouldn't be used to rewrite the rules for the entire country. He wrote that courts need to return to the traditional limits of what judges are allowed to do and stop acting like many legislatures. That phrase, many legislatures, is a pretty harsh criticism. He's saying that lower courts have been functioning like policy-making bodies rather than courts that resolve individual disputes according to law. The 3 dissenting justices, including Justice Sotomayor, warned that restricting nationwide injunctions could create confusion and lead to unequal enforcement of laws. They're concerned that you might have situations where a law is blocked in some places, but enforced in others, which could create a patchwork of different rules across the country. But the 6 justices in the majority clearly weren't persuaded by that argument. They believe that preventing judges from acting like legislators is more important than avoiding some potential confusion about how laws are enforced in different places. The underlying principle here is really about the separation of powers and what role judges are supposed to play in our system of government. The Supreme Court is saying that judges are not policymakers. Their job is to resolve specific legal disputes between specific parties, not to make broad policy decisions that affect the whole country. That principle might sound simple, but it has profound implications for how our government functions. The political fallout from this decision started immediately. The White House and the Department of Justice both released carefully worded statements saying they're reviewing the court's order. What they really mean is that they understand this changes the entire landscape of how they can use the courts to challenge state laws. Just like we saw in recent disputes over border enforcement in Texas, states are already moving quickly to take advantage of this new Supreme Court precedent. Attorneys general from multiple states have already filed new legal briefs citing this ruling to support their arguments against federal overreach. In some of those filings, state lawyers are explicitly arguing that the Supreme Court has reaffirmed that states have the right to defend their own sovereignty without being subjected to blanket injunctions from unelected federal judges. That language tells you what this fight is really about at its core. It's about power and control. Who gets to make the final decisions about what laws are enforced, where they're enforced, and who enforces them? Is it the states or is it Washington? From a legal perspective, the implications of this ruling are enormous. It's going to restrict how federal agencies can use the court system as a tool to block state laws before they even take effect. Instead of getting broad nationwide relief, federal agencies will have to pursue much narrower court orders that only affect specific parties. What that means in practice is that policy disputes between states and the federal government will need to be resolved through the political process rather than through the courts. Congress will need to pass legislation if it wants to change state laws, or voters will need to elect new leaders who share their policy preferences. In essence, the Supreme Court just told lower federal courts to stay in their lane and stop trying to make policy decisions. And this matters regardless of your political views, because both political parties have been using this tactic for years. When Democrats or Republicans can't get what they want through the normal legislative process, they've been going to friendly federal judges and asking for nationwide injunctions to block laws they don't like. This Supreme Court decision effectively shuts down that shortcut. If you want sweeping policy changes that affect the whole country, you're now going to have to win those battles through Congress or through elections, not by finding one sympathetic federal judge who will issue a nationwide order from their courtroom. That's a fundamental change in how political and legal strategy works in America. So what happens next? Since this was an emergency order rather than a full Supreme Court opinion after complete briefing and argument, it doesn't necessarily close the door on all future litigation on this issue. But it does set a precedent that lower courts are going to have to follow going forward. The cases that prompted this emergency ruling will likely go back to the appeals courts, and those judges will need to apply this new, much narrower framework when they consider what kind of relief to grant. The practical effects of this decision are going to be felt across virtually every major policy debate in the country. Gun rights cases, immigration enforcement, pandemic response policies, election oversight, environmental regulations. All of these areas involve ongoing legal battles where this new precedent will apply. When we say this decision has shaken America, that's not hyperbole or exaggeration. The ripple effects really are going to be felt for years to come in countless policy debates and legal battles. Regardless of where you personally stand on the political spectrum, this moment represents a genuine turning point in the relationship between state governments, the federal courts, and the national government in Washington. The Supreme Court's 6-3 emergency ruling serves as a reminder that our constitutional system was designed with careful balance in mind. Different institutions are supposed to have different roles and different limits on their power. When that balance tips too far in one direction, with one institution grabbing too much power or overstepping its proper role, the Supreme Court will step in to correct it. That's exactly what happened here. The big question now is how far this correction is going to go. Will future courts consistently follow this new standard that the Supreme Court has laid out, or will they try to test its limits and find ways around it? Will the federal government respect this new framework, or will they keep pushing for exceptions? And how will state governments respond now that they have more room to enforce their own laws without fear of immediate nationwide injunctions blocking them? These are questions that are going to be answered over the coming months and years through additional litigation and political developments. The Supreme Court has spoken with a clear 6-3 majority, and the message has been received loud and clear by everyone involved in these ongoing battles between state and federal power. How this all plays out in practice remains to be seen, but there's no question that we've reached a significant moment in American constitutional law and in the ongoing debate about federalism and the proper balance of power in our system of government. If you found this information valuable, do me a favor and hit that like button right now. It helps get this critical information in front of more gun owners who need to know about these changes. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an update on your rights. Share this video with every gun owner you know because this information is too important to keep to yourself. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.